Welcome to your first AP World History lecture. If you have not already done so, please go on to the online classroom, find this document, and use it to take notes as you listen to today's lecture. You'll just fill it out along the way, and we'll be using it in our class discussion. So, of course, we're going to be talking about the Neolithic Revolution, which is also called the advent of agriculture or the agricultural revolution. We've already discussed Paleolithic societies, and what we're going to do is try to understand how societies moved from hunting and gathering to farming, why they did that, and what societies looked like once that transition had occurred. So, let's go ahead and get started. A lot of people look at farming, and when they compare it to the life of a hunter and gatherer, they see it as perhaps a bit of a mistake. And we've got a couple of reasons for that. First of all, food production in terms of farming is extremely difficult work. And the lifestyle of a farmer can lead to, and of course the nutrition involved in farming, can lead to poorer health than hunter-gatherers, a shorter lifespan than hunter-gatherers, and just more difficult labor for the majority of people. So, the question is, why would you switch? So we're going to go into that in just a moment, but I want to give you some hard facts to help you understand how the life of a farmer was in fact qualitatively different from the life of a hunter-gatherer. So, hunting and gathering. When modern anthropologists go to hunting and gathering societies that are still around today, because there are a few, they've done some analysis of how these societies actually get the calories that they need to survive and how many hours a week they need to work. And they've got it down to some time frame between about 14 and 20 hours a week. And that amount of work will meet all the needs of a hunter-gatherer. So pretty much if you'd reversed our work week, our modern work week, and you had a 5-day weekend and a 2-day work week, you would get the lifestyle of a hunter-gatherer. So that obviously is a much better work and fun ratio. So hunter-gatherers have it pretty good there. They also had it better in terms of health. There have been some studies of skeletons from the Near East and Greece, and what was found is that hunter-gatherers, on average, men were about 5'9", and women were about 5'5", somewhere around 14,000 years ago. And as you move into the Neolithic Revolution in that area, and you look at the skeletal remains of people from about 3000 BCE, when you're full-fledged into farming in that area, the men had fallen, their average height had fallen to 5'3", and women to 5 feet. Life expectancy also drops off based on skeletal records from about 26 for hunter and gatherers to 19 for people who were farmers in that same area over the period of time. So, and I realize that seems like a really, really young age to die, but those life expectancies are done from birth, and this is actually kind of a key point to remember. I've seen it on some practice AP exams before. Life expectancies are really low in this time period because child mortality rates, or the rate at which children die, is really, really high. So what would happen is lots and lots of people were born, but only a few would make it out of childhood, say to age 5 or 6. And if you made it out of your childhood and you got immunity to a lot of the diseases through catching them and surviving them, then you could live to be a decent age as an adult. But there were an awful lot of children dying of childhood diseases that you guys get immunized for today. One other piece of evidence that lets us know that hunter-gatherers had it pretty good is tooth enamel. I know that sounds a little bit funny, but archaeologists have done dental examinations of skeletons found from the Neolithic period when farming was already in full swing, and they find this thing called dental enamel hypoplasia, which are stripes, horizontal stripes on the tooth enamel, and that is an indicator of serious nutritional stress, so periods of famine or just really bad nutrition. And if you think about a farmer versus a hunter-gatherer is going to be eating all kinds of different foods based on the season, whereas a farmer is going to be eating grain all year long, just as you learned in your summer reading book, right? You've got the two sides of the grain coin, beer and bread, and that's pretty much what people were eating. So that diet was not only boring, it was also not as nutritionally sound as hunter-gatherers. So the question is, why on earth does the Neolithic Revolution happen? And there are a couple of different reasons that we'll look at. We also want to discuss what the Neolithic Revolution is, where it first happens, when it first happens, and then how it spreads. So the Neolithic era begins after about 10,000 BCE, and we can also refer to it, as I've already said, as the Agricultural Revolution. It means that plants and animals were being domesticated. And you have to have the double-edged sword of plants and animals. We see other types of other human groups who, because of environmental reasons, adopt domestication of animals but not plants, and those people are called pastoralists. You define them on your Paleolithic notes discussion worksheet from the other day. Pastoralists herd animals, usually across grasslands, because that's what their environment kind of dictates is the best way of life. People who are agriculturalists have to have both plants and animals that are domesticated. And we'll talk about what domestication means in just a little bit. Literally, Neolithic means New Stone Age, and it's, just defined as a little bit different from the Paleolithic era, which was the Old Stone Age that we were talking about a few days ago. In this time period, the first permanent human settlements emerged, and I want you guys to write a note out to the side of that third bullet point, and I want you to write the word sedentary. Sedentary is a word that just means that you're not moving around a lot, and once people began farming, they wanted to stay close to the food that they had gathered, grown, and stored. This caused the people to stop moving, right? They needed to protect the food that they had stored. They also became kind of dependent on those grains. Your summer reading book talked about this as the ratchet effect. As agricultural practices started to grow, the population was able to grow with the advent of more and more food. So more and more people, and pretty soon it became really, really difficult to rein in that process. And there were so many people that they couldn't go back to their hunting and gathering lifestyle, or they would have starvation. They wouldn't be able to gather enough calories for those new people to live. In the Neolithic era, people are still using stone tools. There's no metal yet. We'll talk about metallurgy. It's a metalworking. It's something that is part of civilizations that come a few thousand years after agriculture is first developed. But in this period, we do see pottery as people start to store food inside these vessels. And of course, they can store liquids and they can also store grain. So where does this change first take place? The first place that this takes place is in an area called the Fertile Crescent. Sometimes you will hear it called Mesopotamia, right there. Right there is the Tigris and Euphrates River. And the Tigris and Euphrates River are, they flow through what is today modern Iraq. And it was a pretty simple process. What people think now, what historians think now, is that the Ice Age began to end somewhere around 12,000 years ago. And as the climate warmed up, the temperature rose, and wild grasses could thrive in this new environment. And the wild grasses that happened to grow in Mesopotamia are very close to domesticated varieties of these same plants that we see today. Specifically, Mesopotamia was growing wheat, and it started out as wild wheat. Humans used the sources of wild wheat just in their gathering as they would have, thousands of years ago. And they kept coming back to those same places where they found those wild stands of wheat. And you can see how over several thousand years you would move toward agriculture, right? You'd plant some really plump grains from the year before, so that you'd have a good place to come back and gather the next year. Maybe you would take down some of the less hardy plants to give the good ones more room to grow. And over several thousand years, that process where humans intervened in those plants led those plants to change. And those changes were beneficial for us as humans, and it made it easier to collect more and more calories from them. And as that process kept moving over the course of thousands of years, humans were able to collect so much in terms of food from those plants that it became silly to leave those plants. They wanted to stay there, cultivate the plants, get the grain. They needed to be there so that the timing was right to gather it, and then once they had it, they could store it, and then they didn't want to leave. Strayer, in your textbook reading, calls this whole process intensification, meaning that they were able to squeeze more and more calories out of less land. A hunter-gatherer group needs thousands and thousands of acres to subsist on, but a group of a few hundred humans can live on something under 100 acres if they're cultivating it pretty intensely. Now, the difference is that you're going to have to work a lot longer hours to make those calories kind of squeeze out of the land. Now, not everywhere adopts agriculture as early as the Fertile Crescent. Some places adopt agriculture a bit later, and that's mostly because of the type of grain that was naturally available in their environment. Up at the top and in the bottom right, you can see modern and very ancient corn. And over here on the left, you see this little thing. It's about 1 inch long, and it's called teosinte. And this, over the course of several thousand years, gets domesticated into this monster grain of what we call corn or maize. And you can see it over here. That's a quarter, that's teosinte, and that is modern corn. Now, this particular grain was available in modern Mesoamerica. That's the area pretty much around Mexico. And that was what was available in the natural environment. So the people there, as they kept doing the same processes that I was talking about earlier, where they sort of tweaked their environment and tweaked the plants to be more beneficial to themselves, over time, several thousand years, they were able to produce modern maize. However, it took a really, really, really long time. This over here is wild wheat, and then on the right side are a couple of varieties of domesticated wheat, and I hope that you can see that wild wheat is not as different from domesticated wheat as wild maize is from domesticated maize. So you can see that the people in Mesopotamia had a huge advantage. Not only do they have wild wheat accessible to them, they're in that river valley, the earth is warming up, so those wild grasses, the wheat becomes more abundant, and they are able to have a head start on agriculture because of it, unlike the people who had to deal with corn, who took a few thousand years longer. All right, let's talk about how agriculture developed. So, this is all dependent on your environment. The availability of calories will determine how you get food. And at the end of the Ice Age, plants are thriving. So, if your environment is full of ice and seals, then you are going to eat seals, right? If your environment is full of wild wheat, then you're going to eat wild wheat, especially since that wild wheat is thriving at the end of the Ice Age. And again, humans started helping those plants along by selecting traits that were really beneficial to those humans. They wanted to increase the calories that they were growing. Humans definitely are an active agent in this, and one of the interesting results from all this human activity as they domesticate plants is that we get a huge, huge, huge amount of diversity that's almost wiped out by human activity, just in terms of the plant life, right? If you drive around town, you'll see a bunch of corn, and corn went from being a kind of random wild crop in Mesoamerica to a hugely dominant crop all across the whole globe today. Pretty much everywhere in the world grows maize. And so what we're doing is finding plants that are beneficial to us, tweaking them so that they're even more beneficial, and then spreading them. And that, of course, causes a huge environmental effect. You can also see a lot of environmental degradation as humans just interact with their environment as farmers rather than moving from place to place, so that their impact on any one area was kind of light. What happened is that humans started using up a lot of the resources that were in the places around them. So we see really early sites. Strayer mentioned some in the modern-day Levant, which is the eastern Mediterranean area, where we can see at early agricultural sites, Neolithic sites, that had villages where people farmed and lived, and as they used up all the vegetation and erosion started taking place, they abandoned those villages and moved on to the next place. And so humans have been having a huge impact really on the environment since agriculture began. Also, in this process, remember the ratchet effect. The ratchet effect was something that you wrote about on number 5 of your summer reading. Once your population grows to a certain extent, you cannot go back to hunting and gathering. You have to continue farming. Otherwise, you'll have a die-off. You won't have enough calories to keep people alive. In the same way, groups of agriculturalists are able to grow their population to be much bigger than they could be if they had remained hunter-gatherers. And eventually, that population pressure is going to lead to groups breaking off and migrating into new areas. As they break off and migrate, they spread farming with them. The farming goes with them. The same kind of ratchet effect takes place. The population grows, and a new group of farmers breaks off and migrates. And you can see this process especially well within a group called the Bantu. It's Bantu, and I'd like you just to add it onto the side of your notes. Bantu groups are originally from West Africa around modern Nigeria, and they're agriculturalists. They also were able to discover the use of metallurgy, or using smelting metals to make tools. And what happened was the ratchet effect among this group. They adopted agriculture, their populations grew, groups broke off, migrated, and what we see today are all across sub-Saharan Africa, people speak related languages. Those languages are all directly related to the original Bantu language from West Africa. So we know that those agriculturalists were experiencing that ratchet effect and moving throughout the globe because of that migration that took place. Bantus always show up on the AP test, by the way. I've seen it on a couple released exams. So stick a little star beside their name, and maybe go back and look at the reading in Strayer from over the weekend, so you can see, so you can make sure that you know that information. Now, agriculture develops in a lot of different areas. The next part of your guided notes are a big chart, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to fill this out by you pausing the video. It's going to be very exciting. So take a moment, pause the video, fill this out, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, what you've got here is a listing of the where, when, and what of agriculture's spread. And you've got a few different areas where it originates and then spreads. And it's kind of interesting because agriculture, relatively speaking, happens at similar times across the globe. Somewhere between about 10 and 4,000 years ago, agriculture is developed on pretty much every continent. This helps us understand that there were a lot of push factors that caused humans to change the way that they were able to get calories and the way that they got energy out of their environment as they moved from hunting and gathering to farming. There must have been some sort of factor pushing them to do that. And of course, a lot of that we can trace back to their environment. So up here at the top, you can see the Fertile Crescent is where it all began. Wheat is the big crop, and they have a whole host of really cool domesticated animals to go with it that just were there already. The wild version of sheep lived in the area, and they were domesticated by the people. The wild version of wheat was already growing, and it was domesticated by the people. You can see that same process happens in a lot of different areas, but I do want to point out some really important issues in the Americas. Right down here. The Andes region is South America along the western coast where the Andes Mountains are. Mesoamerica, again, is pretty much associated with modern Mexico and Central America. And then in North America, they don't really have a lot of big domesticatable animals. And that's really going to impact their ability to be productive. I want you to just imagine a chariot being pulled by a host of guinea pigs. It's just, A, going to look ridiculous, and B, not going to be very effective, right? You can't have guinea pigs pull your chariot. You can't have turkeys hitched to a plow. So it's going to really limit the productivity of the Americas. In addition, remember, Mesoamerica has maize. That's their big crop, and that's going to take them a really long time to domesticate. And you can see that that doesn't happen for several thousand years after domestication and farming has already started way back there in the Fertile Crescent. So the other component of the Neolithic Revolution is animal domestication. You can't just have plants, you also have to have those animals. So you gotta have animal domestication. This is a pretty straightforward definition, but I want you to think about it kind of carefully, because a lot of times people say silly things about animal domestication, like, well, why didn't they just domesticate, I don't know, some other big animal was there? Why didn't they domesticate kangaroos, right? Some animals are just not domesticatable. It's not possible to domesticate them. To domesticate an animal, it has to naturally breed where and when we want it to, and it has to breed pretty often to make it worthwhile for us to put time into it. It has to come to us for food. It can't be skittish and run away, and it's not aggressive. It's not going to eat us, okay? So you can probably think of several examples off the top of your head, right? Cow, chicken, horse, etc. Deer and tigers. I hope you understand why these are not domesticatable, okay? The deer is going to run away from you. It's not going to be calm enough, and you can't really pen it in. It's going to jump out of the pen. It's going to run away. It doesn't want to hang out with you, and you're going to have to, just let it do its thing. The tiger, kind of similar. It's going to eat you. That's not good. These are our domesticated animals. Interestingly, there are about 14 major large species that have been domesticated in the globe, and those animals were all domesticated thousands of years ago. We really haven't had much success in domesticating anything since the biggies. So humans were good at this. We domesticated everything that we possibly could. Anything that's left, really, it's not possible to domesticate it. It doesn't have one of those qualities. All of these animals are from Eurasia. Eurasia is Europe plus Asia. You'll hear me refer to that geographic term a lot this year. Sometimes you'll also hear me talk about Afro-Eurasia. That's Africa, Europe, and Asia. Remember, all those continents are connected to one another, so a lot of times we talk about them as, one big entity. Remember, the Americas have a problem. They've got the guinea pig, they've got the turkey, and they do have one large animal. They do have the llama. Ta-da! That's to help you remember that South America has the llama. That's the only biggie that lives in the Americas. Alright, what does all this mean? The Neolithic Revolution, what does it allow? I mean, it had a lot of really bad effects on the environment, on people's health, on the amount of work that they did. Did it allow anything cool? Well, it does allow humans to settle down and have a sedentary lifestyle. Again, they started having villages, and then at about 5,000 years ago, we see the first cities. They also suddenly had a need for larger amounts of cooperation and group effort. And I want you, beside that bullet point, to write the word irrigation. This is huge. The first big group projects really undertaken by human populations are irrigation works to water their crops. It also allows job specialization. Once you're able to squeeze more calories out of less land, some people won't have to farm, because some people won't have to be involved in getting calories. They will be able to have other jobs, and you could be any kind of artisan, really, okay? So it doesn't necessarily have to be fancy, but people who work with textiles, people who made weapons, people who were stone cutters, anything like that, all those artisans are able to be freed up. A really important thing that really probably results from a whole variety of reasons, really, but I think a lot in a lot of ways goes back to cooperation and group effort, are the social hierarchies. This is the pyramid of social classes. At the bottom, almost all of the population, usually about 90%, would be peasants or farmers. Then you have a few who are able to specialize as artisans, and up the top, the ones directing that cooperative group effort, usually in the area of building irrigation works and collecting taxes in the form of grain, were the leaders, the rulers. Last, actually, second to last, you've got patriarchy. This has a couple of definitions, but you really need to put a big fat star by this word. We're going to talk about it all year. Patriarchy has a couple of attributes. Of course, the preeminent position of males is an important one, but also the way that women are viewed is important. In a patriarchy, women are viewed as either needing protection of men or also needing to be under the control of men. And there are a whole host of ideas about why this developed, but the most logical explanation, at least in my opinion, is that the labor of men in farming was a lot more valuable than the labor of women. And so in the sum of the calories that are being collected, most of them are being collected by men. That wasn't the case in the Paleolithic period. If you'll remember, in the Paleolithic period, something around 70% of the calories were gathered by women. So as those women were gathering the calories, they were very important. When it switches to farming, heavy labor is a lot more valued, and the men, of course, have a more dominant position in that area. Another kind of cool idea is that once people were able to settle down, have a sedentary lifestyle, and collect possessions, men grew worried that they weren't going to will their possessions to their biological son unless they kept their wife or lady under control. So the idea is that as property becomes more important, women become more subjugated under the rule of men as men try to control their reproductive behavior, right? If a woman has a baby, it's definitely her baby, but it's not definitely that guy's baby, okay? So he wanted to try to make sure that he was willing his property off to the right person, which I think is kind of an interesting idea. The last, of course, is population growth, the ratchet effect. Growing populations, the migration of humans to new areas where they spread farming. All right. You're also going to have a serious amount of protection that you've got to do now that you've got agriculture. Your kings, of course, will have to direct your societies. Your militaries will have to protect your people from surrounding hunter and gatherers or pastoralists who want to take their stuff. Interestingly, we see a new kind of weapon appear once people settle down in villages. And the weapon is called a mace. It's pretty much a round rock on a stick, connected to a stick, and you could strike someone's head with it. And it's not a weapon that we see in the Paleolithic era because humans were hunting animals in that era, and there wasn't a lot of warfare, or at least large-scale warfare. And a mace is a really bad weapon to hit an animal with. A, you have to get close to it, and then B, the animal's skull is really elongated, and that round shape on the mace isn't really able to have a big impact. However, a human cranium, which has that like kind of high domed skull, is perfect for being hit by a mace. So what we see is when humans begin to settle down in these villages, maces become a weapon that we see in the in the archaeological record. And what we think is that these early villages and then cities were being attacked by surrounding people who wanted access to their stuff. So what they started to need were militaries and walls to protect their stuff. They also needed priests and scribes to help make sure that the agricultural seasons and the gods favored the societies and the agriculture, and they needed the scribes to help record all the offerings made to the temple in the form of really taxes. And we should define that word bureaucrat out to the side. I hope you can see that there's a little government functionary clip art in your notes. A bureaucrat really just means a government worker. They have a huge organizational role. These Early villages and then cities could be quite large. Some cities could be up to 50,000 people. They needed a huge amount of organization. And it starts off pretty simplistic. This is a really early cuneiform tablet that you're looking at right there on the right. You can see the circles, which are number markers, and then hopefully you can see that there's wheat, and then the bowl turned on its side is the symbol for beer. This is an offering, aka taxes, for the temple in one of the early Mesopotamian cities, and these bureaucrats or government workers would help with organization and running the society in an effective way. And they took their orders from kings and usually priests, who were also usually the bureaucrats. Priests and kings were kind of mutually reinforcing one another's power. So they were kind of scratching each other's back. All right, now, does everybody switch to agriculture? The answer, of course, is no. If you think back to the beginning of the lecture, we talked about how the environment really impacts the way that you get calories. And not everybody was in an environment that was really conducive to farming. So if it didn't make sense, they weren't going to switch. If you live here in a river valley, it makes sense to switch. You've got the possibility of irrigation. If you're in Mesopotamia, you've got these awesome wild grasses growing all around you. And you're going to irrigate, you're going to kind of intensify, and you're going to move to agriculture. If you live here on the Eurasian steppe, a grassland, it's going to make a lot more sense just to domesticate animals, let the animals eat the grass, and never bother with farming. This, again, is a lifestyle that we call pastoralism. Pastoralism, again, is when you domesticate animals and you herd them, and you're migratory. You're a nomad. You move with your animals across these really vast grasslands. You can see another version of this in the African savanna. In this environment, you're obviously not going to farm, right? You're going to do something like fish or look for nice fatty animals. You're never going to farm in this environment. And again, everything is really dependent on that environment. So where does the Neolithic Revolution happen? Mesopotamia, right? The Fertile Crescent. Why does it happen? A lot of it probably has to do with the end of the Ice Age and that slow effect over thousands of years of tweaking plants and trying to get more calories out of your environment, which would lead the population to grow, which would really make a return to hunting and gathering not feasible. Now, I have a little quote to read you from a book by Tom Standage, and he said, "The simple truth is that farming is profoundly unnatural. It has done more to change the world and has had a greater impact on the environment than any other human activity. It has led to widespread deforestation, environmental destruction, the displacement of natural wildlife, and the transplanting of plants and animals thousands of miles from their original habitats. It involves the genetic modification of plants and animals to create mutants that do not exist in nature and often can't survive without human intervention. It overturned the hunter-gatherer way of life that had defined human existence for tens of thousands of years, prompting humans to exchange a varied, leisurely existence of hunting and gathering for lives of drudgery and toil. Agriculture would surely not be allowed if it were invented today, and yet, for all of its faults, it is the basis of civilization as we know it. Domesticated plants and animals form the very foundations of the modern world." That's why we started with agriculture. The entirety of the rest of this course is going to be built on the fact that humans began farming. And of course that links back to the environment. Why did humans farm? Their environment kind of dictated how they would get calories.